Okay, I'm going to try to talk loudly, as I think Caitlin's in the room from U of T, so I've got a cheering side. There she is. She knows I can talk loudly, so I'm going to try to do that. So thank you very much for inviting me. As you just heard, I'm an economist. I'm one of those individuals that, for those of you who were here yesterday afternoon, you heard economists try to collect data. We sign NDAs away, a whole bunch of us ask for waivers to actually archiving our data. So you're going to see what I treat as data is going to even cause more trouble, okay, at the end of the day. A lot of the things that I try to focus on doing, and I'm not going to get into great detail here because this is an economics crowd, but what I try to do is fill holes in data that we have in economics from that microdata by using non-standard sources. So today I was asked to talk a little bit more about the use of things like newspapers in here, because I'll mine basically any source that I think is going to be able to fill those gaps. Anything from OCLC's WorldCat data and the library holdings to the newspapers themselves, both in and out of copyright, as well as books and everything from HathiTrust that were digitized. So really the main points that I want to do for discussion are sort of threefold. First, I'm going to try to explain in the best way that I can why I think a lot of these tools of text and data mining are of growing interest to researchers like me in the humanities and social sciences. Then I want to talk, change hats a little bit, and talk about what the challenges are to the libraries in facilitating this research. And for those of you who want to know the pain associated with it, you can also ask Caitlin, because I'm certainly in Caitlin's office or on the phone with her and Sean Meikle and our chief librarian all the time, asking for ways of helping to facilitate this type of research. And then I'm going to try to offer, at least from my past experience, a little bit about what kind of solutions might be out there. What are things that might be partial solutions if we don't have full solutions yet? But I think we'll get there. It's a matter of time, funding, and perseverance, I guess, at the end of the day. So just to put it in context, imagine the following. Okay, somebody like me walks into your office and decides they want to use distance reading. And for us, distance reading basically means I want a whole mass of books. So yesterday we heard about articles being mined on 1,000 people. And that's a relatively decent sized corpus. For economists like me, that's very small. Okay, so what I look at might be, and some of the pictures I'll show you, is the entire historical New York Times from 1850 all the way through to as close to present as they can possibly give me under the licenses that are signed. So we're talking about millions of articles, and that's one of the newspapers. I will typically, or am looking at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the LA Times, a bunch of the European newspapers when I've gotten them through providers like Gale. So what I want to do, and some of the recent research isn't just about technology, some of it is I want to understand sentiment and uncertainty. And for those of you who have ever taken an economics course early on, you probably heard of Keynes talking about animal spirits and whether or not people's expectation changes actually have specific impacts on the economy. And the question is, how do I measure that? Okay, if you thought technology change was hard, this actually gets even weirder in terms of how are you going to actually facilitate this, all right? So this could be uncertainty or sentiment expressed about a person, a topic, an event. There's all sorts of different ways that social scientists might look at this. So why, as I said, it could be related to policy debates, and we're going to hear about some political uncertainty and political sentiment and everything like that coming forward in terms of other areas of materials that you can mine. You could be interested in trying to uncover biases or conflicting viewpoints that are actually coming up, and that's important even for people who are, say, at the Bank of Canada, who might have communications that are coming out from the economics point of view. Like, did they actually get what I was saying, or do they think I'm being biased in some sort of way? How is this being perceived? In businesses and economics, you might also be interested in marketing or designing new types of product, or trying to predict whether or not a bunch of people are going to be buying this product over what time period. Okay, so that's a forecasting problem. When you want to step back and you want to think about sort of the broader issues for society, when you look at certain types of technical change, which is you heard I spend a lot of time thinking about, sometimes you can start seeing emerging problems, okay? And lawyers do this sometimes too when they're doing class action suits, especially in terms of pharmaceuticals, trying to determine at what point do we start uncovering that something is going awry, okay? Like, when did DDT start causing real problems? Can I actually see that? If I'm reading, journal articles at one point, I might be able to see some of it popping up, but it's a hit and miss depending on what I'm reading, right? Some of the distance reading, you're analyzing millions of things all at the same time, and you might be able to pull these things together a lot faster. Okay? And as I was saying, there could be some measuring important changes in the economy, and this is a problem, especially for central banks like the Fed and the Bank of Canada, is our statistical agencies are always giving us data with a pretty long lag. Okay, so then there's this issue about what we call nowcasting, which is trying to get some sort of feel for what's actually happening at this moment in time that will fill some of those gaps and help us, say if we were going to change interest rates, figuring out what we should be doing now, because it's going to be impacting us about 18 months, massive in the future. And so we need to always be doing this kind of forecasting and refining where we are. Okay? So conditional approaches, if I wanted to talk about sentiment and uncertainty initially, or even diffusion of technology, what would I have? Well, I could look at surveys, okay, as to whether people were actually using this, or how do you feel? So the Michigan Confidence Survey, how do you feel about the economy? Is this a good time to buy a car? Okay, I could look at literature reviews over time and try to extract. That's what I would call close reading, all right? Now, when you actually think about this from the point of view of the researcher, in surveys, we have a certain problem, okay, costs or sampling issues. So you're going to hear from somebody whose background is more related to the political science thing. A lot of poli-sci guys I've talked to about these things say, we always have to remember in surveys for political things what happened with Truman versus Dewey, right? Where it was, where we had sampling bias. Some people are laughing, of course, the Chicago Tribune and everything's right across the street. So when you actually have a biased sample, and in that time it was because not everyone had telephones and where they ended up getting the information was incorrect in terms of the forecasting of who was going to win the presidency, that's starting to happen again, I think. A lot of people are starting to say. It's like people in my category, because I'm now of that age, where I've got my cell phone. If they call me during the day, I'm not going to answer. I probably don't have the landline sitting at home. I'm not online issuing a survey. There's this issue of how are you going to reach out and get the appropriate information from the different demographics. For literature review, we still also have this costly purpose, right? It's time consuming. What articles am I going to have? So it's a different kind of sample bias, all right? So the alternative way, and this is why I think sometimes the text mining and everything could be a very interesting and attractive part, is that you can look at all of these things together quite quickly if it's actually in the appropriate format, okay? And I'll talk about that. What's going to happen is, again, if it's already in the appropriate format and we put it into this, we can bypass some of the costs, okay, that we would have to take for setting up new types of surveys and going out and collecting these things. And it's going to provide both real-time evidence and potentially historical evidence in a consistent way, all right? And I'm not saying give up on the other stuff. It's going to basically complement the findings from some of these other methods. So it's always good. I always feel more comfortable as an economist because I know there's noise in everything I'm kind of looking at. Okay, whether or not I've got different sources basically confirming what's coming in so that the signal is actually being appropriately transmitted to us. All right. Now, again, this is if the setup challenges are overcome. This could even be faster to execute than certainly trying to design a survey, going out there, collecting all the data, analyzing it, and bringing it back. So just as a general setup about the kinds of things you can do, I don't want to go into all of the regressions and everything behind it, but this is just an example of some of the things that you can pull out once you've actually gone through a lot of cleaning. So this is an example from the New York Times, and this is sentiment about political parties. I thought I'd sort of set it up for the next talk as well. Okay, so this is the New York Times. A lot of people say the New York Times is a slightly liberal newspaper. Okay, when you go on the Mondo sales and stuff, you'll see that confirmed, right? Now, if you actually do the sentiment analysis, and this one is done in the linguistic way, looking for certain types of markers on negative hits and positive hits and looking at the fractions, you would actually see that the GOP is in red and the Democrats are in blue. You would, in fact, see that the New York Times likes the Democrats a little bit more than they actually do like the GOP. Now, the other interesting thing is when you start breaking these things down, they also like to claim that they're trying to be quite balanced. What you would actually see is they also express more uncertainty about the GOP than they do the Democrats. And they actually use both more positive and more negative language when talking about the Republicans than the Democrats. So it does appear that they're trying to give different sides of the views. They just still like the Democrats a little bit more. There have been times where there's a little bit less, okay? But here, in terms of the sentiments about political parties, might be important when you're actually trying to regress it on who do you think is going to be the next president of the United States? Is there a change in the sentiment? What do you think is going on with some of the subcategories of this in terms of the likely passage of certain types of regulations for the economy? When we talk about the economic uncertainty, all right, and this is something that economists sort of worry about. I've got uncertainty all the time. That just basically means I don't know what's going to happen next, right? Some people might say, well, isn't that sort of the same as sentiment? Maybe I'm fearful or something. Fear is not necessarily the same thing as being uncertain, okay? And if you actually do look at these things from a consistent source, you can start seeing at times where you actually do have sentiment and those animal spirits running at the same time as we can be very uncertain about what's going on. So I'm Canadian. I don't get to vote in any of the elections over here, all right? But what we did see is when Donald Trump was actually elected, right, we saw a huge boost to sentiment numbers, okay, confidence numbers. And we also saw from other indicators of uncertainty, all sorts of uncertainty pop up because we didn't know what was going to happen with trade and many of these other things that have been taken on by the current president. All of those things, when you back them out and you look at these from a trending point of view, you can use history in order to tell you what is likely to occur to everything from stock markets to productivity to employment numbers over time. And I'll tell you, right now, an idea where it says sentiment is high and uncertainty is high, sentiment still looks like, from my own research, takes precedent. Okay, so for people who are kind of scratching their head wondering, like, why do I have all this uncertainty, but the American job labor market numbers are just on fire? This would tell you that there's reason for that. Okay, if you lose this sentiment on those dimensions, we're potentially in trouble. Okay, what else can you do? You can sort of identify changing tastes. So over here, and you want to look at like how long are the articles, how much in-depth information are you getting? You can see these kind of things emerge from a research standpoint, certainly post-war period. And in fact, for the New York Times, you started seeing after the run-up to the Great Depression, after that you saw this huge increase in the number of articles that were related to business and economic issues. And as we start getting more and more statistics, there's more and more convergence on talking about things that are actually happening to the economy and to business overall. But as I said, it's not just sentiment and text analysis, but those are very important. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about sentiment and text analysis is it's not keyword searches, right? Keywords won't just do that for you, right? You need the whole set of corpuses, the whole articles, in order to talk about the trends on this. And this is where we get into this big setup cost and what it is that the libraries can potentially do to help. But as I said, I always get into these conversations where they say, I can see it, right, when I talk to the people at the library. Is this something that Michelle is asking for Michelle's research, or is this something that is actually very broad and related to a lot of people? I said, no, you don't understand. The poli-sci people will use these kind of things. Like, there is a slight, if we build it properly, they will come. I think then the other thing is, if you build it properly and they come, how big are they and how much services are we going to have to provide for it? But you can clearly see, outside of even talking about things that might be related to political science and economics, you might want to do things like tracking technical change that might have implications for medicine. It could have implications now for AI and looking at a larger group. So here, when you do that, it's not just even the raw text. You need metadata to be appropriately defined on the text. Okay, to illustrate this point, if I want to think about changes in technology, you try to come up with lists of words. Even keywords themselves may not work. So we may need some of those labels and tags. So I'm in the I'm in the library science sphere. So I can use, metadata, MARC records, right? What we'd like to see is basically what we have in MARC records with standardized language so that we can carve out different pieces. So we're analyzing large texts in a way that I don't have to be picking and choosing certain types of word lists or having to go back and train. When you do these kind of things, if I put in a sort of technology sphere or even a medical sphere, what are the technologies that are going to be most transformative? Okay? What countries are going to be using this? What kind of industries are going to be affected? How are the innovations being used? Are there those other side effects we didn't see, okay, that as the government, we might want to think about safety issues coming forward. And then two, for the economists also, what are general purpose technologies? These are the things that are going to change life as we know it, okay? Think about electricity, think about the invent of the computer. So how do we do this? Well, again, this is sort of subject keywords and tagging. So yesterday I remember hearing a question that said, if we got Factiva to give us over some of the tags that they had, would that be useful? And the answer is yes. The other answer is Factiva only does these things for a certain time period and it may not be consistent. What we actually do need is the metadata going back and forward. And in fact, that's some of my own research is trying to figure out, are there ways of using what we have, okay, and in different corpuses that I've signed those NDAs, and no, I can't disclose all of the details of all the contracts that were signed, but can we then use machine learning to try to populate basically MARC records at an article level so that we can do what we want to do for text mining and data mining for topics in an efficient way, okay? So just to give you an idea, this is the diffusion and effect of robots and how you would actually do this. So if you look at patents, robots, there's at that end of the time period, you see that going up. You see data that's being collected by the private sector on the, sort of some of the spread of robots. Just to give you an idea, so Factiva, I used Factiva as an example. Factiva is also going to start showing you the same kind of patterns. So even though we don't have a lot of good information that says, okay, I'm going to all of these different companies and I'm asking them about, are you using robots? We see a lot of discussion, okay? You could do everything from text mining on things in Factiva to looking at the information coming out from companies to try to figure out what it is that they're actually doing, okay? By looking at the topics, and this goes back to the issues about tagging, okay, you can even start seeing what articles are being written about what industries in what countries, so you start getting a feel for whether or not these are spreading in a particular way, all right? You see the same kind of thing as AI. So everyone said AI is taking over the world. It is, but potentially, okay? Not as fast, I think, as some people are saying, but what you clearly do see, again, is a relationship between what it is that you are seeing reflected in the media, okay, and even the hard numbers, even from non-traditional sources like scientists and specialists on LinkedIn who have particular jobs that are being cited in this way. There's lots of things that we can do if we have access to it and if we have appropriately cleaned corpuses with good metadata brought in. So what you would do see, and this is just another illustration of it, what we see in books and what we see in Factiva, these are all very related, and the colors are just sort of showing you different groupings. This is actually by the Library of Congress, classifications grouped in a particular way, and my trying to do mappings and crosswalks between things. You do see that we're highlighting the same things. So I want to talk about the roadmap to facilitation in the part that I have left, okay? So really, when I talk about the roadmap to facilitation, I think of a bunch of things. I need content, I need permission, I need storage, I need it to be discoverable, I need information specialists, I need tools, I need visualization, okay? And each of these have a lot of parts, moving parts, as I was just sort of showing, trying to make this stuff actually work together at the end of the day. So I'm just gonna walk through this in terms of what we would have to do to facilitate this for crazy people like me who wanna take a shot at this, all right? The first one is getting the content, which might seem at first stage to be actually pretty simple to do, right? Does the library have the content? So I can Google, search it, or go to my library catalogs and search it. And I'm gonna come up, maybe yes. If it's yes, the next thing I have to start looking at is it digital? Okay, and that makes a difference, especially for some of the historical research. If it's yes, great. I can move on to the next step. If no, I've got a bunch of challenges that I had to come up with, all right? What are the challenges? Can I digitize it, or can the library digitize it? Where do we digitize this? Who is going to pay for this to be digitized? Who can use it afterwards? Where is it archived? Now, as I said to some of the people I was talking to yesterday and earlier this morning, I'm very fortunate to be at U of T. You know, we were involved in the Internet Archive project very early on. We have certain types of scanning materials and scanners inside the library right now, and I have been able to fill holes in collections by getting permissions from copyright holders and everything, bringing it back to the library, and us trying to transfer things from print to digital, all right? Now, for the library community too, you'll understand if the hole is actually in a serial type publication, you're going to jump through even more hoops, because even trying to get interlibrary loan, if you don't have it, will create certain types of barriers to try to fill in certain types of collections in this particular environment. In terms of who pays, well, some of that was my grants, some of that was U of T's budgets. It really depended on exactly the types of uses and the permissions as to who we could unlock this for at the end of the day. Now, as I said, if the answer is no, I don't have it, as we sort of said, we have to go into, can I actually buy it or still access it? Sometimes we don't even know where all of these pockets are, and that goes back to the library catalog issue. Is it digital? Again, if it's yes, great. Maybe we can actually bring it into our collections with a lag. If no, then we go back to the same issues about, well, if I do get it, can I digitize it? How does this actually work? The partial solutions here are probably twofold. All right, as I just sort of said, one of the things that we've done a number of times at U of T Libraries is try to see if there's some way of us partnering to do this or applying for some other grant funds in order to support it. And the other thing is that we did hear about scraping and everything is, if we actually did create it for the researchers themselves or someone else did, is there a way of us archiving it so that other people at other universities could actually take advantage of this, all right? Now, the second part of this, which I just sort of skipped over, is like, I got the content, great. Now the question is, can I actually use the content? That's a different question altogether, so I found out. So do we actually have permission to do text and data mining on this? And a lot of times the professors don't bother looking, okay, but a lot of times we don't, all right, and that becomes a bit of an issue. So like I said, if yes, that's great, and in fact, U of T has started trying to put these things into contracts as much as possible. And so yes, you could go ahead and try. If no, as we said, there's been a lot of challenges. First question, who do you ask for permission? Now, a lot of times, the stuff that we get from the researcher's point of view is also from a secondary provider. So when I've had to look at the New York Times, not only did I have to ask for permission from the New York Times, we had to get permission from ProQuest, because we have dual levels of different kinds of contracts. I'm an economist. I never thought I'd spend so much time looking at contracts in my life at this particular level of detail, but it's a serious issue. Then the question is also, who asks for permission? Is it the researcher themselves going to these individuals, or is it in fact the library? Who basically reviews the contracts and the agreements? Because when we're talking especially about in-copyright material, there are serious legal liabilities to this, and you probably don't want the faculty member signing on the bottom line at the end of the day. Okay? Now, this is really, really key, because I'm going to tell you as a faculty member, and I've seen this in a number of journals, where faculty members go, all right, they're not going to let me do it, but it's a really good idea, and I really want tenure, so I'm going to basically scrape things out right under the wire, very quietly, over a time period with lots of research assistants, and I'm going to basically accumulate the content outside of the firewalls, and I'm going to do what I want to do anyway, and then it gets into print. And I've actually had cases where I was talking to a provider that I was working with, and I said, well, but you handed this over, can I get a copy of this? They said, well, I can't give that to you. I said, interesting, I'm sitting here with my journal open on my desk, and this one says, you are the source. And there was a gasp from the legal team on the other side, oh, I hope that doesn't get out. So partial solutions, as we said, at U of T, we've actually attempted to negotiate a lot of these rights in advance as the contracts are coming through. In the shorthand, if you can't break the copyright issue, there may be a way of working with people, and Haughty Trust does some portion of this as bags of words, right? So I took the stuff that was in copyright, I created something which isn't going to let me do everything, but it's going to let me do at least some portion of what I want to do by looking at jumbling things up so I can't actually recreate the article in and of itself. And so that was, I guess, lucky for Haughty and Google and everyone that the courts came down on their side on non-consumptive research. Right? Now, once you get this, and so again, large-scale stuff becomes a bit of an issue. Where do I put this? All right, because it's not small. So you may require a secure repository, especially for in-copyright and sensitive materials. And so this is where we've had to face these kinds of challenges for me. Basically, I have every individual who's going to touch my servers behind the library firewalls here, signing MOUs and NDAs to even try to explain to them, this cannot move outside of this particular environment. And if the journals came to me and said, give me your raw material, obviously I cannot do that because I can't hand over the raw text. So we have to think very hard about how to facilitate this without basically making it impossible to actually work. Now, storage space becomes a bit of an issue, and I'm an economist, inefficiency always bugs me on some of these things. Having all sorts of different people basically buying computer equipment to store exactly the same stuff may be completely inefficient, and it would probably make much more sense to have the repository be at the library. Now, the other thing that you might want to do is you may need to have an environment where you have virtual access to materials that can be integrated with high-powered computing. And so, for example, when I was working with the Hadi Trust, and trying to get access to its information, there were things that were in copyright that I needed to touch, and I eventually got permission to do it, but we ended up having to do this at Indiana as opposed to Toronto because we could not transfer the materials across the border for copyright laws, and again, all of these things were locked down, and it took just from one run through the materials about 1,000 processors, a little over a day, dedicated to this on the high-speed computing to actually get through this corpus. So it's actually quite large, and we need to be able to think about these things as well. Now, again, things like Hadi is the things that we should be thinking about. Is there some sort of way of creating centers where the biggest libraries and stuff like that can sort of share the costs and share the responsibility for updating these things? And that might actually help things, because once we've actually got the content, we've put the content, we've secured the content, that's at least part of the way there, okay? Now, discoverable. This is the other thing I learned when I was talking to a lot of colleagues over at the library is, what do we mean by the definition of discoverable, okay? Now, the challenge here for the researcher sometimes is it may be hard to figure out what we actually have access to, that we actually have permission for, that we actually can, in fact, get onto our own group. And that may not show up well in some of the catalogs the way that they actually are, okay? That's easy. We can kind of do special catalogs for these materials or update information on our regular catalogs for use. That's a pretty easy, simple step. But real discoverability is the enable of usage of this stuff. And the challenge is many researchers who would be interested in this do not have appropriate backgrounds in computer science to basically take possession of the raw stuff that's handed to you and say, now what do I do with it? And they say, well, you're gonna have to go get some training in Python, and then you're gonna have to clean the data, and then it becomes kind of overwhelming and also very costly for individuals who don't already have that background knowledge. But the solution here is that the libraries actually could play a very crucial role. There are certain steps that most individuals who are doing the text analytics would do in terms of pre-processing, in terms of indexing, all right, that could in fact be done to help facilitate things, okay, with basic tools that most individuals at a first pass could figure out, is there something there that I want to then invest my time in further, okay? How do I basically do this? As we said, indexing materials is a big issue, okay? So when I first went to Hadi and I asked for permission, can I go through your content? I can do even some keywords, trying to figure out what's going on. We very quickly discovered, and I'd never had this conversation before, I heard about something called Solar, and I heard about something called Cassandra, and as I started to scrape various things through the catalogs, which I thought was okay, I got to a point where it actually started causing trouble. I said, no, now we're gonna have to wait until we actually move this thing from Michigan to Indiana behind firewalls to get us access to these things. Okay, now I know what Solar is, and I kind of know what Cassandra is, but indexing of materials and making them available is something that can be done at a central level. Researchers like me should not be touching that, okay, at the end of the day. Pre-cleaning, hyphenation, dirty data and stuff is something simple. Again, once it's done once in a particular format, well documented up there, it should be, that's the standard that we're using. Bags of words, if you need to transfer some of these things, again, for some component of your research group, in terms of if everybody comes, okay, sometimes the bags of words can be shared much easier. You don't have as many restrictions on it, and maybe that's something else that when we're pre-processing things, once somebody has a bunch of these bags of words, that's okay. We can kind of share some of those things amongst ourselves without the legal problems from before. Existing tools. So there's probably some of you in the library, wait a second, Gail told me that there's a bunch of tools out there, and Hadi has told me there's a bunch of tools out there and stuff like that. It's true that it works for some instances, but it's still a very limited amount of instances, okay? Now, for the Hadi Trust and everything, they have the data encapsulations and stuff like that, but if I go in there to do this, it will be sufficient if I want to talk about 1,000 articles. If I want to do this on hundreds of thousands of articles, I will not be able to do this here. I'm going to still have to take possession in some sense, and I'm still going to need an environment to actually be able to facilitate my doing a bunch of the computation, okay? Now, The Gale stuff, again, is going to be able to give you some general trends, which is going to be great, I think, for some of the undergraduates. But the other thing to make sure that we understand is part of what the researchers are going to want is not just something from Gale or not just something from ProQuest. A lot of times they're going to want to look across different platforms, and Gale's material is not going to merge well with ProQuest, is not going to merge well from the stuff that's coming in from Hottie. Libraries in a central way could actually solve some of those problems by providing some of these kinds of tools itself. Just to give you an example of what they can't do right now, is you can't do proper topic modeling on a lot of these things. Again, you could try to download a bunch of these things if you had permission. Most of that was going to be the historical stuff, and then we're going to be stuck with the individuals saying, oh, do I understand how to use Java and how to use some of the tools that are actually out there. As I said, we can't go across the different sources without it. The other thing is the metadata is very poor. I love the fact that everybody in library science and information science has spent a lot of time trying to clean up metadata. It's very important in this. We have very poor general metadata, especially on serial publications, and so metadata creation is something else that this group could really help with. Okay. Allow for basic visualization and graphing behind the firewalls. That's something that's going to need to be done as well on this. All right. Space for facilitating more in-depth analysis. You're going to probably want to lock it down so that somebody has to go through a few hoops before they kind of get access to it, because you don't want everyone hitting the system all at the same time. That's going to be too costly for you to do. But you do need to be able to work with the researchers as well at certain levels in order to facilitate. Okay? Challenges, of course, are going to be the cost of equipment and the personnel and the tools. Okay? Now, if you partner with the researchers, sometimes you can use some of the grant funding, right, in order to actually do this. And probably there's, economies of scale. Instead of my kicking servers underneath my desk, last year what I did is I went to the library. I said, listen, since we're doing a bunch of this stuff when I go to refresh, why don't I refresh with the same type of equipment that you're using behind your firewalls, and we'll just integrate, all right? And that seemed to be something that seems to be working right now. So I think cost for personnel and tools, I think shared service models are where we're kind of going to go. For us at home, I think this is something more like a Scholars Portal. If tools or shareable corpora are developed in-house, right, we could license them or share them outside of the community to try to do some sort of cost recovery. Again, economist, open source models completely may not be sustainable in the long run, and so that always comes to mind with me. Okay. So just wrapping it all together, because I think I'm basically out of time, we need to put the pieces together in order to complete the picture of what it is that we kind of need. We need the access to digital content, we need the permissions, we need the storage and the computer power, and we need to combine this with the staff and the appropriate tools so that the researchers can come and do the things that we do best. Crazy research that sort of came to mind that we can then work on facilitating, I think, within the group. This isn't going to go, I guess, bottom line, I don't think this is going to go away. I think that you're going to find that a lot of people are going to be coming, especially if we also start archiving inside some of those other data sets we were talking about, things like Twitter, things like Facebook. If we're actually partnering with these individuals and we get this, we're going to want to put that under the same umbrella. I didn't talk about sort of other non-traditional stuff like the videos and audio, but that's another very rich source that, again, once we standardize it and we put in things, we can blend across a lot of these things, just making it all that much more exciting in terms of access to data. Okay, and the research libraries are the absolute, I think, perfect research partners for this. I've been convinced on that for the number of years I've been working with U of T. If it's already under your licenses and you were involved in getting that content to begin with, all right, it makes perfect sense that you're actually there standing with us when we're actually looking at this. You would potentially be on the hook if we kind of went around the terms of agreement anyway, which could be very, very costly in the background. All right, so that said, sorry, I'm going to wrap up and turn the mic over to, are we taking questions at the end or at the end?
Hi, Michelle. My name is Christine Stamison. I'm the director of the Neural Consortium based at CRL. And part of my job is to try to get text and data mining into our licenses from our libraries. I'm finding it less difficult to get that nowadays because I think publishers, especially the smaller publishers, understand it better because they're really worried about losing their content. We're getting much more traction in trying to get the raw data from the publishers now to put on a non-public facing like supercomputer.
Yes.
The issue that we're having though is what they say is once the scholar is finished, they want that deleted. So you know, we've made good steps in trying to get the raw data, but now we're trying to say, no, we don't want that deleted because they might want to keep running more algorithms through that data. And frankly, since we've paid for that now, other people should be able to use it. So that's now where we're at. So it's a struggle. So I think the more publishers understand what's going on with this and know that they're not facing, you know, the loss of all their corpus, it's going to be easier, but it's still a bit of a struggle. So thank you for being a proponent for that.
No problem. So I'm just going to make one comment on that, which is something I've at least found when I had to go initially to talk to some of the providers of, and it may not just be for the text mining. There could be some things for the data mining. What I tried to remind individuals for is we have to have that to be able to replicate our findings. Okay, at the end of the day. And so if there is language that's also built in allowing us to replicate our findings, if they won't let you keep the entire corpus, and so a number of times, as I said, I can't talk about all the details of all of the stuff so this is a very general set of comments, is that there may be some components of things that the researcher may be able to take away, all right? So as an example, if bags of words doesn't interfere with copyright, they might be willing to allow you to keep that as a partial replication issue, okay, as opposed to saying, I need to keep all of the content that you ever touched. So there may be the derivative product that comes out, and I mean, you may want to not use the term product because the moment you use the word product, they go, oh, wait a second, business model, can I sell this to somebody? Okay, but it's that avenue that I've found tends to be a little bit more successful in terms of the negotiation as to what can be kept if they are very concerned about the content getting out there. And I think that's the other thing about centrally, you know, I heard yesterday, I think Jason was the one who said, no, we should never sign NDAs. Well, I mean, it'll make them more comfortable if they do. So I do have like one provider that I've worked with a lot where we've had somebody else at the university, so I'm told through the grapevine, go and ask the same provider, and their legal team would not let the second provider in. They said, well, at least Michelle's been dealing with me for many years. I know nothing got out from her control with her particular protocols. So we're willing to let her have more. We're not willing to take our chance on something else. So that's why I said the more that we sort of standardize things, the more that we have appropriate policy in place and different things that we can kind of keep over time, I think that's probably the best way to go.
Hi, I'm Kevin Merriman from Yale University. I have a quick question about discoverability because you invoke the concept of auto-populating MARC records. Does that mean you're going to the library catalog to see if these data sets are available?
So it depends on exactly which component we're talking about. So the auto-population of MARC records, so what I'm thinking of here is more trying to use some of the algorithms along with data that has been tagged already by hand. So there's different ways of training a model, okay? One of them would be, I have a bunch of individuals who are going to read through these things. I'm going to have to do a hand code myself in order to figure out what the topics are. Then I'm going to train a particular model in machine learning, and I'm going to apply the model to elsewhere. Now, the thing is, it's very costly to basically do the hand coding, right? If we are actually working with the publishers and we have some tags that they already have done with, somebody already did some portion of that coding. It may be kind of like crowdsourced things that we can then apply the models to. We can still refine it over time. I'm not saying that it should be elevated to the same level of, you know, MARC record creation that is at the Library of Congress or a bunch of those standards, which I love and I use for the books. But at least it's something better than what we have now, which is almost nothing. A lot of times we don't even have the date information, as a bunch of you would know, right? Because you're going to elevate at the MARC record metadata level to like the first date that the journal was there. That's when the copyright date comes. And we may not have one record for every single publication coming out. There's a way of doing it, right? But it's also, again, a shared resource, bringing a lot of those data sources together and borrowing things to populate, okay, from different sources, different fields from the MARC records over and above title and author. right, in terms of date created, in terms of geotagging that can be done to tell us what are the areas, so in the 650 fields, right? You could think about topics that could come in or issues on geographic things or personal entities that are actually made and talk about authority records, et cetera. So, although I'm going to, again, my background is not in library science. I walk over every so often and people explain these things to me. So I apologize if I get them wrong.
Hi, Susan Parker, UBC. We learned about this need because we were contacted by a publisher about a violation of a license, right? And so after a long discussion of everything, our librarian is now part of the research team, which I think is really a great way to go. Maybe not the best way to get into it, but are there other ways that we can maybe organize our participation from the start with faculty, and how can faculty in return let us know more about what you're doing, what you need?
So I think the best way, and I guess I've advocated to Larry Alford about this, is in some sense, I think one of the ways that the library could facilitate figuring out what's sort of needed is by actually trying to even just reach out through the departments, through first an appropriate survey even in your own backyard to figure out who needs what. So like I was at a different conference that was a cross-disciplinary conference, and I ran into some of my colleagues in political science and found out that poli-sci had digitized a bunch of stuff. It was outside of the library. They were holding it on there, and I said, why were we not at the library integrating this? Because it seems like it's completely inefficient on that way. And the library didn't know they were doing it, and they hadn't thought to actually reach out to the library. So I think in terms of starting sort of reach out through, sometimes there's the departmental librarians and everything, to try to get an idea of not just what is going on, but what people might be using. As we sort of go forward, right? That at least informs some of the decisions as to where some of the resources should be spent. But I think it's also a community issue because I think a lot of these things that are going to happen at UBC are going to happen at U of T, and so I do think, and obviously at Yale and Harvard, and I saw, SMU has a bunch of stuff up in terms of resources. This is something that I think a lot of people are going to move to, and it just may be much more cost-effective and efficient if we work together to build it after consultation with the individuals who are early-ish adopters of this.
Hi, Boaz from Lehigh. Hi. So what about topography of the text? So like where is it at, and the spaces, the character count for everything, and comparing that to, the actual words. So what will you do, or what do you think about those things? Thanks.
So a lot of this depends on the quality of the text that obviously is coming forward. What I have found out, even myself, looking at things that have come through providers, is that even the date in which they were OCR'd, so optical character recognition for the people who don't play in this game, may have even been poor compared to what we have now. So sometimes what I've had to do in order to put things back on track is to look at, let's see what the latest technology is in OCRing. If we actually do have the contents, the scan itself may not be horrible. You might actually even improve upon what the text is that's being extracted by simply doing a rescan with the newer technology and newer software that's actually out there. And I found that has improved getting that a little bit closer. The other thing that sometimes will happen that I've seen, again, this is many different pieces, but what you were saying about spacing and even the punctuation. There have been times where things might come to you and the punctuation's been stripped out for whatever reason and was destroyed, and in part of the corpus, not the entire corpus, because sometimes people are cobbling these things together from the different sources, and what was considered an article or what was considered a page, there are problems. As we see, though, again, if we're working as a community moving forward, everybody slowly saying, okay, look, I've cleaned up this, I've cleaned up that, we can slowly move to sort of frontier over time and just replace, what we know is worse early on and work towards present. Because now a lot of things going forward are being born digital, right? So there's going to be a lot less problem than there will be for the historical stuff going past. off the hot seat. Okay, thank you very much.